We're talking right now with Victor Goines, who is the Director of Jazz Studies at Northwestern University. Hi, Mr. Goines. How are you?
I'm good, Landon. How are you doing?
I'm doing very well.
Great.
My first question for you today is, what do you feel are the qualities of a successful jazz musician?
What are the qualities of a successful jazz musician? Well, first of all, I think if I can actually put that to one answer, I'd be rich. But, I think the quality of a successful jazz musician is someone who actually has worked very hard on their craft and have been able to put themselves in a place that allows them artistically to be able to express themselves in the manner that they see fit for that situation.
Mm-hmm.
You notice I didn't talk about money because money doesn't describe success in any field, but certainly not in jazz.
Mm-hmm.
So that's my answer. What you asked for? How many was three?
I'm sorry.
And you just said one. What did I? What is the formula for a successful jazz musician? Right.
Anything that comes to mind.
Yeah, I think it's someone who actually has, who can actually express themselves artistically in the tradition of jazz music, so that when you hear them play, you not only hear their voice, but you hear the entire legacy of the music. For instance, when I play, my hope is that when I play my horn, someone can not only hear me in my individual voice, which is what they're going to hear because I can only be me.
Mm-hmm.
But hopefully they can hear the legacy of the tenor saxophone or the legacy of the clarinet. So in my voice, I would like to be able to hear Coleman Hawkins and Lester Young and Ben Webster, Don Byas and Chewberry and all the great tenor saxophones who came before me up to me, right on up to my point.
That's very insightful. So you grew up in New Orleans, correct?
I did.
How did growing up in New Orleans stimulate your interest in jazz? And do you think your style is distinctly, if I may use the idiom, Creole in comparison with players from Chicago or L.A. or New York?
I don't know. Creole was a group of people. First of all, growing up in New Orleans and jazz, I can't say I really made a lot of the jazz club until I was like 15 years old. I started really going out and checking out the music. Prior to that, I was like everybody else playing in elementary school band and really by the age of, I would say by the age of 11 or 12, I was starting to study the clarinet and the classical literature.
Mm-hmm.
But I learned some popular music at the time, some Grover Washington, some popular music in the Temptations and those kind of people.
Mm-hmm.
But not until I really listened to John Coltrane when I was about 13 that I made a decision to go in the direction of jazz.
Mm-hmm.
Now, being from New Orleans, I think that gave me, I always say being from New Orleans gives me an unfair advantage because it's all kinds of music that takes place in the city, with the exception of an Afro-Cuban scene. I didn't really see that in New Orleans when I was coming up. That doesn't mean it didn't exist. It just was not because I was trying. But in terms of early New Orleans jazz and hearing music at the parades that take place during Mardi Gras, I didn't really get on Bourbon much until I was a late teen or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
But the sound of the music was always in the city, so for me that was an unfair advantage I'm speaking about. It was always there, and whether I realized it or not, one can debate it. But I heard it, and it was always there. And it's like when someone is speaking in the background to you, you're not really talking to them, but you can hear the message they're giving you.
Mm-hmm.
I was kind of hearing that message.
That's neat. How have your skills as a composer opened doors for you? And do you have any favorite pieces that you've written or experiences for commissioned works that you favor or were exceptionally exciting?
It's a good question. First of all, I think composition has helped me as a player because it kind of helped me write things that I try to use my writing for my small group to allow me to create exercise that would allow me to overcome some of the obstacles I have to deal with.
Mm-hmm.
Whether it be playing on certain chord progressions or playing in certain keys specifically. That's one thing I try to address. Or playing at tempos or whatever it may be. When I write for my group, I try to write things that address the limitations that I'm dealing with so I can try to move beyond it.
Mm-hmm.
I learned that from my experience of playing with Wynton Marsalis.
Mm-hmm.
Um, in terms of favorite pieces, I like to play ballads. That's kind of my thing. Um, and on my latest record entitled Twilight, I think that's one of my favorite, if not best, compositions of the ballad. It's entitled "Why Did." That's probably the best ballad that I've written, and also the title cut of that recording, Twilight, because I took a chance on playing it not only as a ballad, but then incorporating some things from the Afro-Cuban tradition in it and playing it bolero. So it came out pretty well. Those are two that I really like the most.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of big band writing, I've done some things for the Jazz and Lincoln Center Orchestra over time, and some things that have been commissioned for me. And of the things that I've written, I was John Coltrane called Harmonique.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Lincoln Center Orchestra. That's come out pretty good. But there was a piece I wrote for Chick Corea too. I just remember that called "You're Everything," and that was a successful arrangement for me as well.
Uh-huh. That's very neat, very unique. So you mostly feel that your experience as a composer has helped you overcome musical obstacles, whatever they may be.
Well, I think it works hand in hand because when we improvise, we compose instantaneously.
Mm-hmm.
When we write as quote unquote a composer, we sit down at the piano and figure out what we want to organize in what order for whatever group of ensemble we're dealing with, be it a quartet or a large wind ensemble or a jazz orchestra or orchestral, like in classical music, orchestral music. So the two work together because one allows me to figure out what I want to play, but it also becomes more material that I can use inside of when I'm improvising in an instantaneous type of situation.
Mm-hmm.
So they work really, really closely together. And I don't write as much as I would like, but I think it really helps me along in terms of what I want to be able to say on my instrument.
Mm-hmm. So you're a fairly established member of both the Lincoln Center Jazz Orchestra and the Wynton Marsalis Septet, which are very prestigious and well-known ensembles. How did you get the experience to be in these groups, and how has each experience benefited you as a player?
Well, the way I became a member of the Wynton Marsalis Septet is that in 1993, Wynton was considering the chief sax player of his septet. And Wes Anderson, who was the alto saxophonist in the group at the time, recommended me for the group. Quite often, to the stand, he will talk to other members of the band to see, what do you think about this? Oh, what do you think about that? So Wes Anderson actually recommended me for the group. And at that time, I was playing clarinet, tenor saxophone, and soprano saxophone, and the other saxophones as well. But those horns, particularly, is what he needed in the group. So I was able to come in and fulfill the need that he had in mind for the septet. In those days, also the septet was a member of the Jazz and Lincoln Center Orchestra. Mm-hmm. So one function and the other was a way to keep both of the keeping his septet working, the big band working. Mm-hmm. Able to move in that, but that experience was really important for me, more for the clarinet than the saxophone. Because in the early days of the Jazz and Lincoln Center Orchestra, we used to play the music of Duke Ellington. Mm-hmm. And what it did, it required to become more formed the tradition of the clarinet in the world of jazz. Mm-hmm. I mean, I had studied classical clarinet. Oh, I should say clarinet and classical music. There's no such thing as a classical clarinet. I had studied classical music on the clarinet. Mm-hmm. So I had an understanding of the history of that tradition, but I had not really investigated the history of the clarinet in jazz. Mm-hmm. So playing with Wynton and the Jazz and Lincoln Center Orchestra, it required me to go do the homework to know who Jimmy Hamilton was, who Russell Procope was, who Barnaby Gard was, who Rudy Jackson was, who Sidney Bechet was. Mm-hmm. All of those people along the way. And with all of that, as you learn more about one person, becomes like a triangle or a tree that branches out and allows you to learn more about other people. So, learn about Bechet in Duke Ellington's band, explained the reason why Duke Ellington always had a clarinetist in the band, because he loved Sidney Bechet and New Orleans music. Mm-hmm. So he tried to put that element in his band at all times. So that's one thing that really was a benefit for me being in the Jazz and Lincoln Center Orchestra. It made me deal with my clarinet in a much more in-depth and in historical manner.
Hmm. So what was your connection to Wes Anderson before joining Wynton's group?
Wes is from Brooklyn, New York, but he decided to go to school at Southern University in Baton Rouge. And I live in New Orleans. Southern University is about an hour and a half from New Orleans.
Uh-huh.
So on the weekends, Wes would come back and forth to New Orleans to make different gigs, but also to sit in with different people. So we were in college at the same time.
Oh,
So
okay.
yeah. And those interactions of people, being in school together and trying to learn how to play the music together, it was just a natural fit that we had. We became really good friends at that point in time as well. So when he joined Wynton's band, it became, I still kept in touch with him, but he kept me in mind when that opportunity came to be able to have a chance to play with the ensemble.
Hmm. Very neat. What do you feel are the most critical elements in preparing a student for a career in music?
I think it's important that you encourage a student to have a work ethic.
Mm-hmm.
Without a work ethic, it's difficult for them to have self-motivation, and that's really important. You can't let the situations around you be the reason why you do what you do. You have to do it because you love to do it, and that's what you want to do.
Mm-hmm.
So I try to encourage my students to be self-motivated and have a very strong work ethic. I try to give them a historical tradition about the music and how it exists and how they fit into it so they can hopefully figure out what their role is in it.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody's not going to be John Coltrane, but it doesn't mean everybody cannot be successful in music. I need to ask you to hold on 1 second. I'm trying to find my handkerchief.
Go ahead.
Excuse me. Sorry about that.
No problem at all.
So, in getting the historical perspective, it really allows you to realize where you're going to, because you can only know where you're going to if you know where you're coming from.
Mm-hmm.
It allows them to have a role in it. And I try to encourage them to be much more thoughtful about what it is they're doing. Like in recent times, I ask a lot of questions of my students so I can make them think about what it is that they're doing. Because when you invest 40 years of something, 40 years of your life into something, you should know without a doubt what it is that you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
Football, if it's basketball, if it's jazz, if it's classical music, if it's whatever, science, you should become the expert on it. And you should be able to defend your thesis about it. You should be able to defend how you feel about it with some kind of substantial fact to support your theory about it. And everyone has to agree with you. It just means that you have a point of view you should be able to defend.
Mm-hmm.
And then the last, I try to, even though music has meant so much to me over the years, I try to get my students to realize that is a very small part of the picture, because, as my good friend Herman Riley would always say, we are men and women first, and musicians second.
Mm-hmm.
So you have a certain humanity to be able to be a musician. You have to keep a certain amount of arrogance. It allows you to play. And it allows you to believe that you can do what it is you do. Humility actually allows you to play with others.
Mm-hmm.
Because without humility, you think you're the only thing and that no one else can touch you. But that's not true.
Yeah. Certainly.
So that's things I try to instill in my students.
That's a very uplifting theory. Thank you for sharing. How has having a master's degree enhanced your experience as a musician, or in general?
Well, having a master's degree has enhanced my life, I think, in terms of having an opportunity to be exposed to other musicians at that time in my life.
Mm-hmm.
And to be exposed to other great teachers who taught me a lot of different lessons, not only about music, but about life. So in terms of what I do, sure, it helped me to understand more about what I do in terms of a player, because I did study music during that time. But it actually allowed me to meet people along the journey who do what I do and some don't. But it helped me grow as a person more than musically, I would have to say. The musical growth for me always takes place when I interact with other people on the stand.
Mm-hmm.
So when people talk about jazz education, or can it be taught in the university? Yeah, it can be taught in the university, but it cannot be exclusive to the test tube of a university. You have to get out and be a part of the neighborhood, part of the society that's creating music on the spot.
Hmm.
He practiced in the room all day, all night, all day, all night, and did never play with anyone. So the universities are very important to the research and the development of all education, including jazz. But at the end of the day, we have to figure out how do we use that in society? How does it become a part of day-to-day life for everyone involved? And how do we make us all better people? That's what I would say. So going back, we become a little bit more clear how inside of this thing called jazz for me by becoming exposed to more people along the way.
Hmm.
In fact, in terms of university, like I went to Virginia Commonwealth University, but more than that, my master's degree was playing. It was playing at Benjamin's on Broad Street,
Hmm.
to the Washington D.C. area, sitting in at the One Step Down. It was going to New Jersey and playing at the Peppermint Lounge in Newark, New Jersey. All type of master's degree certification because I was out in the club playing, and it allowed me to gain knowledge along the way. So it wasn't just a matter of a university; it was a matter of what Barry sometimes calls the University of the Streets, to be educated out in the real world.
Hmm. So you feel that the community around a university and the actual physical experience of dealing with other people and interacting with other people musically is as important, if not more important, than the university experience.
It's absolutely important, because you cannot evolve in the world of jazz by yourself. I
Hmm.
mean, you're evolving with everybody around you. So, yeah, in short, yeah, that experience was really crucial to my development at that time.
Let's see. So you have served on the faculties of several universities, from your alma mater, from Loyola University in New Orleans to Juilliard. What drew you to Northwestern?
It was at a time when the dean of Northwestern sought me out and asked me about coming help to rebuild their programs. And for me, I always like to be at the front end of a program.
Hmm.
I think that's the best way that one can be involved because it allows you to put your imprint on it and kind of mold it the way you see fit. So when the dean, Tony Marie Montgomery, contacted me about helping to rebuild the jazz studies program, I saw it as an opportunity to once again be involved in something that I could put my mark on it and kind of shape it based upon some of the things that I saw necessary for a young student in jazz music to grow,
Hmm.
while at the same time inside of this research institution. Um, I've taught at a lot of different places that you mentioned, but I think being at research universities and liberal arts colleges actually um, add a dimension that conservatories cannot.
Hmm.
I, most of all, at conservatories or schools of music that don't necessarily have a large curriculum of liberal arts courses involved, students sometimes get in the practice room and practice day and night, all day long. They don't have to study the great writings or the great artwork or the sciences and whatnot. So they have invested not only a great portion of their life, but everything in what they think they want to do. But there are so many things in the world that change from day to day. And one of those things could be for anybody to not want to play music anymore. So I think being at a Northwestern or a Northwestern place like Northwestern will allow students to really get a broad view of education to help mold them as people to be much more functional in society.
Hmm.
Um, I think practicing all day is great. I think to be able to read the great works written by Shakespeare and Langston Hughes and other people like that is really important too. We have to try to develop more Renaissance people
Uh-huh.
along the way.
That's actually a very encouraging thing to hear. I am someone of diverse interest, and
Uh,
that's part of the reason why I'm looking at Northwestern and other similar schools. Is I'm looking at for places that have rigor across the board, whether it be in music or in sciences or literature. So I'm encouraged that you share that perspective. My next question for you is this: were you guided by a mentor when you were younger, and what was their impact?
I've been lucky. I've always had a mentor, whether I knew it or not. When I was in the third grade, it was a nun. Her name was Sister Juliana. I'm 51 years old now. For my 50th birthday party, I sought her out and invited her to my 50th birthday party. I looked at her the same way I did when I was 8 years old. You know, I still have the same respect, and she's always that mentor to me. In junior high school, from a musical perspective, well, let me back up. As a kid, also, in football, it was my football coach. Football coaches are powerful, powerful people, because they have these sayings and these way of motivating you. And my coach at that time was Mr. Felix. And he had a saying he would always share with us before every game. He would say, winners never quit and quitters never win. Which one are you? That's always been a motivation for me, that when times get hard, he always said, when the time get when the tough get going, the going get tough. Or when the going get tough, the tough get going. That was his way of saying, you know, don't quit. So that was my motivation when I was in elementary school. In junior high school, there was a music instructor by the name of Donald Richardson. He passed away some years ago. But Mr. Rich, we called him. He was very, very disciplined kind of person and a true disciplinarian. He demanded the most out of us, and when he didn't get it, he let us know it. School of hard knocks, but it did amazing things for me. In senior high school, I went to an all boys high school in New Orleans by the name of St. Augustine High School. That person, there were a lot of people by then, I have to say, not just in music, but I'll talk about the ones in music for me. Carl Bluin, Blouin is the spelling of his name. In fact, I'm going to his 50th celebration on Friday. He just retired for 50 years at my high school, and I'm going to celebrate him on Friday. He has been a mentor to me the entire way, because he was my clarinet and saxophone teacher as well as my mathematics teacher.
Oh, really?
And for those who don't know it, I used to be a math teacher, and it was because of him I decided to be a math teacher.
That's really neat.
And he certainly helped me out as I was teaching, because I probably did more math as a teacher than I did as a student. My band director was Hampton, and he was another man who also taught at St. Augustine High School all his life. I've been fortunate to be around teachers who have given total dedication to the environments that they were in. Another one is Lawrence Winchester. He and Mr. Blue went to school at the same time. So when I like that, it allows me to be very dedicated to what I do. As a young professional, that person was Ellis Marsalis. I've learned so much from him over the years, and I'm still in contact with him to date. And it's funny, even though we don't see each other as much as we used to, it's like the conversation is continuous from where we left off the last time. That's how much we're in sync with each other. And then, you know, not least throughout my life, my mentors have been my mother and my father. They've given me great guidance. I've seen my father, who had a tremendous work ethic when he was alive. He made sure we had everything we had. Made sure we had everything we needed if we didn't have everything we wanted. I think it's important for people to realize what that statement actually means. There was nothing not willing to do in terms of work to make sure we had what we needed to have. So that, again, of watching him over his entire life and me as a kid, definitely became part of the way I do what I do. Mother, you know, of being a strong disciplinarian, but at the same time being a very compassionate person who I at any point in time. And, you know, what can I say? Those two have been my mentors throughout my entire life, and my mother still is a mentor to me.
So it's safe to say that you've had mentors in pretty much every walk of life, from every different facet of your life.
Absolutely. And I anticipate I'm going to have some mentors still to come. Because, you know, it's a lifelong endeavor. When you stop trying to learn, then you have some concerns to worry about. But if you're always on a path of knowledge, you will always continue to grow, and it will always energize you to want to live.
Hmm. Absolutely. Well, I have one final question for you for this interview, and it's simply this. What advice would you give any high school or young college student who's pursuing a career in jazz?
The advice I would give that young person is this. I had the good fortune of watching my two nephews, who's my second sister's kids. They both are doctors now. One's a nephrologist, the study of the kidney, and the other one's a veterinarian, which people will say, oh, he just treats animals. But as his brother would say, it's much more difficult to treat an animal because they don't talk to you.
Mm-hmm.
You have to know what's going on, and you have to study everything. So the point is, when they were younger and they were considering wanting to go into medicine, their mother is a nurse, and she made them what they call shadow a physician every chance she had. So she would bring them to the hospital and made them follow doctors to see what doctors do, so they can get a very clear understanding. What does that entail me having to do in order to become a professional at that level? Well, for young kids today, I would say really speak to musicians and performers and entertainers to understand what that means to you. I really think it's a good idea for kids to start getting a feeling for what they want to do in the ninth grade. Because then, if it's not what they want to do immediately, they can change without some time. But try to seek out people who do what you want to do. That's my whole thing about the faculty that I've hired at Northwestern University. I try to hire people who will give the kids or the students an opportunity to study with people who do what they ultimately would like to do. And then if you have that experience, it can give you a clear-cut understanding of what it means to do that. And that's what happened years ago. You had to be an apprentice of someone to be a carpenter or a blacksmith or whatever the occupation was going to be. So why not be an apprentice to a performing jazz musician if that's what you want to be? Why not be an apprentice to an educator? You still have to be an apprentice in medicine. You have to go do your time in the ER and watch doctors and observe and do yada yada. Music should be the same way.
You know, it's very interesting that you bring up this point because, as I was explaining to you in my email asking for this interview, in fact, that I am involved in a class at school that does exactly this. And this is, in fact, the reason why I'm interviewing right now, is that I am shadowing Dr. John Mills, who is a professor of jazz studies at the University of Texas. And
Right.
he is my mentor, and I meet with him for 2 hours a week in a variety of settings, whether it's performance or sometimes we discuss composition. Last week I was actually in the studio. And the whole purpose of this course is for students to shadow professionals in the workplace and really do get a feel for exactly what they want to do. So it's interesting to me that your perspectives completely coincide with what I'm trying to do. So.
Absolutely. Well, tell him I didn't read your statement before I made that statement.
Oh, certainly.
But I think it's really important. I think you're onto something good, and I think the program you're involved in is definitely very positive, and I wish you continue success with it. I encourage them to continue to do that, give students much more insight about what it is to be a professional at whatever occupation it is.
Mm-hmm. Certainly. Well, those are all the questions I have for this interview. Thank you so much for taking the time to meet with me.
My pleasure.